Tonight, I'll be reading Lewis Carroll's timeless tale, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. So settle into bed, relax, and close your eyes. Chapter 1, Down the Rabbit Hole. Alice was growing exceedingly bored of sitting beside her sister on the riverbank, especially with absolutely nothing to occupy her mind. She had peeked a few times into the book her sister was reading, but it was dreadfully dull. It had no illustrations or conversations at all. What good is a book, Alice thought, if it doesn't have any pictures or people talking in it? As the warm afternoon sun made her drowsy, Alice pondered whether making a daisy chain was worth the effort of getting up to pick the flowers. Just as she was about to decide, a white rabbit with pink eyes dashed past her. Now, there wasn't anything especially strange about seeing a rabbit. Alice didn't find it too peculiar when the rabbit muttered to itself, "Oh dear! Oh dear! I shall be late." Later, she realized she probably should have found that rather odd, but in the moment, it all felt entirely natural. But when the rabbit pulled a pocket watch out of a waistcoat and glanced at it before scurrying away faster, Alice sprang to her feet. The thought struck her, she had never seen a rabbit with a pocket, let alone one carrying a watch. Burning with curiosity, she darted after it, racing across the field. Just in time, she saw it dive into a large rabbit hole nestled under a hedge. Without thinking twice, Alice followed it down, never once considering how she might get back out. The rabbit hole stretched forward like a narrow tunnel before dropping steeply. So suddenly did it slope that Alice didn't have a second to stop herself. Down she went, tumbling through a deep, dark well. The descent felt endless. Either the well was incredibly deep, or she was falling very slowly, for she had plenty of time to notice things and wonder about what was coming next. First, she tried peering downward to see where she might land, but it was far too dark to make out anything. Then she looked around at the well sides and was surprised to see cupboards and bookshelves built into the walls. Here and there hung maps and pictures on hooks. She passed a jar labeled orange marmalade and took it from the shelf, only to find it disappointingly empty. Fearing it might hit someone below, she carefully returned it to another shelf as she continued falling. Well, thought Alice, after this, tumbling downstairs will be nothing at all. People will think me ever so brave at home. I wouldn't even flinch if I fell off the roof. Down, 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 would it never end? I wonder how far I've fallen by now, she mused aloud. I must be getting close to the center of the earth. Let's see, that's about 4,000 miles down, I think. She recalled bits of geography from her lessons, and although this wasn't exactly the time to show off, she figured it was good practice to repeat it out loud even if no one could hear her. Yes, that seems about right, she thought. But I wonder what latitude or longitude I'm at. Alice had no idea what either meant, though they certainly sounded grand. I wonder if I might fall straight through the earth. How odd it would be to pop out among people who walk with their heads down. The antipathies? No, that's not quite right. She was somewhat glad no one could hear her muddled vocabulary. But I'd have to ask what country I'm in, please, ma'am. Is this New Zealand or Australia? She giggled at the thought of curtsying mid-air. Would they think me silly? Perhaps it's better not to ask. Maybe I'll see a sign or something. Down, down, down. With nothing else to do, she began talking again. Dinah will miss me tonight, I bet, she said. Dinah was her cat. I do hope they remember her saucer of milk at tea time. Oh, Dinah, I wish you were here with me. There probably aren't any mice in the air, but maybe you could catch a bat? That's sort of like a mouse, right? Do cats eat bats? I wonder, she was getting sleepy and mumbled, half dreaming, do cats eat bats? Do bats eat cats? It didn't matter, as she didn't know the answer to either. She began to nod off, dreaming she and Dinah were walking hand in paw, and she was earnestly asking, Dinah, tell me truly, have you ever eaten a bat? Suddenly, thump! Thump! She landed in a heap of sticks and dry leaves. The fall was over. Alice wasn't hurt at all and leapt to her feet. It was pitch black above her, but in front of her stretched a long passageway, and there went the White Rabbit, still hurrying. There was no time to lose. Alice ran like the wind, just in time to hear the rabbit exclaim, "Oh, my ears and whiskers! How late it's getting!" She turned a corner, but the rabbit was gone. Instead, she found herself in a low, long hall lit by rows of lamps hanging from the ceiling. Doors lined the walls, all locked. After trying each one with no luck, she wandered down the center of the hall, disheartened. Suddenly, she came upon a small, three-legged glass table. Upon it sat nothing but a tiny golden key. Her first thought was that it might open one of the doors, but alas, the locks were far too big or the key far too small. It didn't fit any of them. On her second trip around the hall, she noticed a low curtain she hadn't seen before. Behind it was a door only 15 inches high. She tried the key in the lock and to her joy, it fit. The door opened to a small tunnel, no bigger than a rat hole. Alice knelt and looked through it, gazing into the most magnificent garden she had ever seen. How she longed to step into the sunshine, to stroll among bright flower beds and bubbling fountains. But she couldn't even squeeze her head through. Even if my head went through, thought poor Alice, what good is that without my shoulders? Oh, how I wish I could fold up like a telescope, she sighed. I think I could, if I only knew where to begin. She went back to the table, hoping to find another key or perhaps instructions on how to fold herself up. This time, a small bottle sat atop the table, one that hadn't been there before. A label around its neck read, "Drink me," in large, elegant letters. It seemed simple enough, but wise little Alice wasn't going to drink it blindly. No, she said, I'll look first to see if it's marked poison or not. She had read plenty of tales where children met unfortunate ends by ignoring basic safety, getting burned, poisoned, or worse. She knew the rule, if it says poison, it's probably not a good idea to drink it. This bottle, however, bore no such warning. Alice tasted it. It had a delightful blend of cherry tart, custard, pineapple, roast turkey, toffee, and buttered toast. She liked it very much and finished it quickly. What a curious sensation, she said. I must be folding up like a telescope. And sure enough, she was shrinking rapidly. Soon, she was only 10 inches tall. Her face brightened. Perfect. Now I can fit through that little door into the garden. She waited a few minutes, just in case she might keep shrinking. What if I vanish altogether, like a candle's flame, she wondered. She tried to imagine what a snuffed candle looked like after going out. But nothing else happened. So she ran to the garden door, but oh no! She had forgotten the key. It lay atop the glass table, far beyond her reach. She tried to climb the table's leg, but it was too slippery. Exhausted, she sat down and cried. "Come on now, what good is crying?" she scolded herself. "Stop it right this minute." She often gave herself excellent advice, though she rarely followed it. Once, she had even scolded herself for cheating at croquet against herself. But pretending to be two people is useless now, Alice sighed. "There's barely enough left of me to be one." Just then, she spotted a little glass box under the table. Inside was a small cake, neatly labeled with the words "Eat me." "Well," said Alice, "if eating this makes me grow tall, I can reach the key. And if it makes me smaller, I can crawl under the door. Either way, I'll get into that garden." So she nibbled a bit and anxiously placed a hand on top of her head. "Which way?" she asked aloud. But nothing happened. That was unusual. Generally, cake made something happen. Feeling underwhelmed, she shrugged and finished the rest. "Curiouser and curiouser," exclaimed Alice. She was so astonished that, for a moment, she forgot how to speak properly. "Now I'm unfolding like the largest telescope ever made. Farewell, my feet." When she glanced downward, her feet appeared miles away, almost vanished from sight. "Oh, my poor feet. Who's going to put your shoes and socks on now? I surely won't be able to reach you anymore. You'll have to sort yourselves out as best you can." But I must be kind to them, Alice thought, or else they might decide to walk in the wrong direction. Let me think. I'll send them new boots every Christmas. She imagined how funny it would be to send presents to one's own feet and addressed a mental package, to Alice's right foot, ESQ, rugside, near the hearth. With love, Alice. "Oh, what utter nonsense I'm rambling," she muttered, just as her head collided with the ceiling. She had grown so tall, now more than 9 feet, that she had no choice but to stoop down. Quickly, she grabbed the tiny golden key and dashed to the door that led to the garden. But, poor Alice! Even lying on her side, she could only peek through the door with one eye. Getting through it was more impossible than ever. Disheartened, she sank to the ground and began to cry again. "You should be ashamed of yourself." Alice scolded herself sternly. "A big girl like you, crying like a baby. Stop this instant." But the tears came all the same. She wept gallons, until a vast pool had formed around her, 4 inches deep and stretching halfway across the hallway. Before long, she heard the patter of feet in the distance. She wiped her eyes quickly and looked to see what was approaching. It was the White Rabbit, returning and now impeccably dressed, with a pair of pristine white kid gloves in one paw and a large fan in the other. He scurried along hurriedly, muttering to himself, "Oh, the Duchess. The Duchess. She'll have my ears if I've kept her waiting." Alice, desperate for help, decided to speak to him. "If you please, sir." But the rabbit jumped as though he'd been shocked, dropped the gloves and the fan, and dashed off into the darkness, as fast as his feet could carry him. Alice picked up the fan and gloves. The hallway was sweltering, so she fanned herself as she wandered along, still talking aloud to calm her nerves. "Dear me! How odd everything is today. Just yesterday everything was normal. Have I changed overnight? Let me think. I do feel somehow different. But if I'm not myself, then who am I? That's the big mystery. She began listing the girls she knew her age, wondering if she'd turned into one of them. I'm sure I'm not Ada, her hair curls, and mine never does. And I can't be Mabel, I know so many things, and she knows almost nothing. Besides, she is she and I am I, and, oh dear, how confusing it all is. She decided to test her memory. Let me see, 4 times 5 is 12, 4 times 6 is 13, and 4 times 7 is I shall never get to 20 this way. But perhaps the multiplication table doesn't matter. Let's try geography. London is the capital of Paris, and Paris is the capital of Rome, and Rome, no, that's all wrong. I must have turned into Mabel after all. Alice tried reciting a poem she knew by heart. She folded her hands on her lap like she was back in school and began. How doth the little crocodile improve his shining tail and pour the waters of the Nile on every golden scale? But her voice came out hoarse and strange, and the words didn't sound right. How cheerfully he seems to grin. How neatly spreads his claws and welcomes little fishes in with gently smiling jaws. Oh no, those aren't the right words at all, sighed poor Alice, eyes brimming once more. I must be Mabel. I'll have to go live in that boring little house, with barely any toys and a mountain of lessons. No, she said more firmly, if I'm Mabel, I'll stay down here. They can call to me, come back, dear, but I'll only answer, who am I? And if I like who they say, maybe I'll go. But if not, I'll stay until I become someone else. She burst into fresh tears. Oh, how I wish someone would stick their head down here and talk to me. I'm so tired of being all alone. As she spoke, she glanced down and realized she had somehow slipped on one of the rabbit's gloves. How did that happen? I must be shrinking again. She rushed to the table and checked her height, about 2 feet tall now, and still shrinking. Oh no, it's the fan, she cried, dropping it immediately. She barely escaped vanishing entirely. A narrow escape, she muttered, heart racing but relieved to still exist. Now, to the garden. She ran to the little door, only to find it shut once again, and the golden key still lying high atop the glass table. Worse than ever, she sighed. I've never been this small before, how infuriating. As she muttered her frustration, her foot slipped and, splash! She was chin-deep in salty water. Her first thought was that she had fallen into the sea. If that's the case, I can catch the train home, she reasoned. Alice had once visited the coast and formed a clear mental image. Wherever you went, there were always bathing machines, children digging with wooden spades, and a row of boarding houses behind the beach, then, of course, a railway station. But after a few moments, she realized she was swimming in the massive pool of tears she had cried when she was 9 feet tall. I wish I hadn't cried so much, she said as she paddled about. Now I'll be punished by drowning in my own tears, how absurd. But then again, everything's absurd today. Just then, she heard something splashing nearby. She swam closer and discovered a mouse had fallen in as well. At first, she thought it was something bigger, a walrus or maybe a hippopotamus, but remembered how small she now was. It's worth trying to talk to it, she thought. Everything's so peculiar down here, maybe it can talk too. She began timidly, "Oh mouse, do you know the way out of this pool? I'm quite tired of swimming in circles." Alice had never addressed a mouse before, but remembered from her brother's Latin grammar that "oh mouse" was how one should speak to one. The mouse looked at her with one eye and gave what seemed to be a wink, but didn't respond. Perhaps it doesn't speak English, thought Alice. Maybe it's a French mouse, come over with William the Conqueror. So she tried, in schoolbook French, "Où est ma chat?" which meant, "Where is my cat?" The mouse gave a terrified leap, shuddering all over. "Oh, I beg your pardon," Alice cried, realizing the poor thing must hate cats. "Not like cats," the mouse shrieked. "Would you like cats if you were me?" "Perhaps not," said Alice, soothingly. "Please don't be upset. But I do wish I could show you our cat Dinah. She's such a sweet, gentle thing, purrs by the fire, licks her paws, and washes her face so delicately. And she's such a great mouser, oh." She stopped, realizing the mouse was bristling with offense. "I'm so sorry. We won't talk about Dinah anymore, if you prefer." "Indeed we shall not," snapped the mouse. "My family has always despised cats, vile, low, vulgar beasts. Never mention that name again." "Of course not," Alice said quickly, eager to change the subject. "Do you like dogs?" The mouse didn't answer, so Alice pressed on. "There's a lovely little dog near our house, a clever terrier with curly brown hair. It can fetch things, sit up, beg, and do all sorts of tricks. The farmer who owns it says it's worth £100. "Oh dear," she murmured, "I think I've offended it again." Indeed, the mouse was swimming furiously away, churning the water with its tiny limbs. "Dear mouse, please come back," she called gently. "We won't talk about cats or dogs anymore, I promise." The mouse paused, turned back slowly, and said with a trembling voice, "Let's head to the shore. Then, I'll tell you my story, and you'll understand why I hate cats and dogs." By now, the pool had grown crowded. Ducks, dodos, parrots, eaglets, and several strange creatures all floating along. Alice took the lead, and the entire soggy, unhappy group swam toward the shore. What a curious group gathered on the riverbank. Feathers ruffled, fur matted, and clinging tight, all of them soaked from head to tail. They were, without a doubt, the strangest collection of creatures Alice had ever seen, drenched, cranky, and thoroughly uncomfortable. The most pressing matter, naturally, was how to get dry again. They held a muddled sort of meeting to discuss the issue. After a bit of disorganized chatter, it felt completely normal to Alice that she should be chatting casually with birds and beasts as though they were old friends. She even got into a rather heated debate with a parrot, who ended up sulking and simply repeating, "I'm older than you, so I must know better." Alice wasn't prepared to accept this without proof, and when the parrot stubbornly refused to reveal its age, she dropped the matter. At last, the mouse, who appeared to hold some degree of authority over the group, called out loudly, "Sit down, all of you, and listen to me. I'll have you dry in no time." They obediently formed a circle, with the mouse in the middle. Alice watched it closely, feeling quite desperate to dry off, fearing she might catch a cold if she remained soaked much longer. "Ahem," said the mouse, with great importance. "Is everyone ready? What I'm about to tell you is the driest thing I know." Silence settled over the group. "Thank you. Let's begin." And so, the mouse launched into a very dry tale indeed. William the Conqueror, supported by the Pope, was soon accepted by the English, who were in desperate need of leadership and had grown used to conquest. Edwin and Morcar, the Earls of Mercia and Northumbria. Brrr, shivered the parrot. I beg your pardon, said the mouse, frowning but maintaining a courteous tone. I didn't say anything, the parrot replied quickly. I thought you did, said the mouse, slightly miffed. Anyway, Edwin and Morcar supported William, and even Stigand, the upright Archbishop of Canterbury, found it advisable. Found what? Quacked a duck. Found it advisable, repeated the mouse, this time more sharply. Surely you know what that means? Well, I know what it means to find something, said the duck. It's usually a frog or a bug. But what did the Archbishop find? The mouse ignored the interruption and pressed on. Found it advisable to go with Edgar Atheling to meet William and offer him the crown. William's early behavior was quite moderate. But his Normans. The mouse paused to glance at Alice. How are you feeling now, dear? A bit drier? Not at all, Alice replied sadly. This doesn't seem to be helping. In that case, boomed the dodo, rising with great ceremony, I propose that this meeting be adjourned immediately in favor of a more vigorous solution. Speak English, squawked the young eaglet. Half those words don't make any sense, and I don't believe you even know what they mean. The eaglet ducked its head quickly, trying to hide a mischievous grin. Some of the other animals chuckled audibly. I was saying, the dodo continued stiffly, that the best thing to get us dry would be a caucus race. A what? Asked Alice, intrigued more by the dodo's solemn tone than by the concept itself. Well, said the dodo, puffing up, the best way to explain it is to do it. So they began. The dodo marked out a rough circle, though its shape was of no importance, he claimed, and the group was scattered all around it at random points. There was no starting signal, no 1, 2, 3, go. They all simply began running whenever they pleased and stopped when it suited them. It was entirely unclear when the race began or ended. After about half an hour of chaotic running, with everyone panting and dripping, the dodo suddenly cried, "The race is over!" The animals crowded around him, all breathless and clamoring, but who's won? The dodo pondered this in great seriousness, tapping one claw to his forehead, just like the portraits of Shakespeare Alice had seen. Eventually, he pronounced, "Everyone has won, and all must have prizes." But who's going to give the prizes? Asked a chorus of voices. Why, she is, of course, said the dodo, pointing a feathery wing at Alice. The crowd swarmed her instantly, shouting, "Prizes! Prizes!" Alice was completely flustered. She dug into her pocket and pulled out a box of candy, miraculously dry. She handed them out, just enough for one each. But she must have a prize too, the mouse insisted. Indeed, the dodo agreed gravely. What else do you have in your pocket? Only a thimble, Alice said, feeling rather embarrassed. Hand it here, said the dodo. They all gathered around once more. With great solemnity, the dodo presented the thimble to Alice. We beg your gracious acceptance of this elegant thimble, he announced with ceremony. Everyone clapped and cheered. Alice thought the entire thing was absurd, but everyone else was so serious, she didn't dare laugh. Instead, she bowed as formally as she could and accepted the thimble. Then it was time to eat the candy. The big birds grumbled they couldn't taste theirs, while the smaller ones choked and needed help. Eventually, the noise died down, and everyone settled again. "Now," said Alice to the mouse, "you promised to tell me your story, and why you dislike cats and dogs." "Mine is a long and tragic tale," the mouse began with a sigh. "It is a long tale, certainly," said Alice, staring at it with fascination. "But why is it sad?" She became so preoccupied with its tale that she imagined the story as a winding, literal tail twisting across the ground. Fury said to a mouse that he met in the house, "Let us go to the law. I will prosecute you. Come, I'll take no denial. We must have a trial. For really I've nothing to do." The mouse was reciting its tale, but Alice's mind wandered so much that her version twisted into nonsense. "You are not paying attention," snapped the mouse, glaring at her. "What are you thinking?" "I'm terribly sorry," said Alice humbly. "You were just at the fifth bend of your tail, I think?" "I was not," shouted the mouse, furious. "You are insulting me with your foolishness." "I didn't mean to," cried Alice, distressed. "You see, you're so easily offended." The mouse grumbled and turned to leave. "Please, come back and finish," Alice begged. "Yes, please do," the others chimed in. But the mouse only shook its head angrily and scurried away. "What a shame it won't stay," sighed the parrot. An elderly crab took this moment to speak to her daughter. "Let that be a lesson, dear, never lose your temper." "Hush, mother," snapped the young crab. "You're enough to rattle an oyster." "I wish Dinah were here," Alice said aloud to no one in particular. "She'd have fetched that mouse back in no time." "Who is Dinah, if I may ask?" said the parrot. "Oh, she's our cat," Alice replied eagerly. "She's an expert at catching mice you wouldn't believe. And birds, too. Why, she'd snap one up in a blink." This comment caused a stir among the group. Some of the birds quickly made excuses to leave. One magpie began wrapping itself tightly, muttering about the chill in the air. A canary called its chicks, "Bedtime, my dears, hurry along now." One by one, they all fled. "I wish I hadn't brought up Dinah," said Alice sadly. "No one seems to like her here. But she's the best cat in the world." "Oh, Dinah, I wonder if I'll ever see you again." Her heart sank, and she began to cry once more. The loneliness settled around her like a fog. But after a short while, she heard soft footsteps in the distance. She looked up quickly, hoping it might be the mouse returning to finish its story. It was the white rabbit again, trotting cautiously along and scanning the ground with a fretful expression, as if he had lost something terribly important. Alice could hear him muttering under his breath, "Oh, the Duchess. The Duchess. My fur and whiskers. She'll have me beheaded as sure as ferrets are ferrets. Where could I have dropped them, I wonder?" Alice immediately guessed what he was looking for, the fan and the white gloves. Being kind-hearted, she began helping him search, but everything around her had changed since her swim in the pool. The hallway was gone, as was the glass table and the little door. It was as if the entire scene had melted away. Very soon, the rabbit caught sight of Alice. "There you are, Mary Hen," he barked. "What are you doing out here? Go home this instant and fetch me a pair of gloves and a fan. Quick, now." Before Alice could correct him, explained that she was most certainly not Mary, and his commanding tone startled her, and she took off in the direction he pointed. "He thinks I'm his housemaid," she whispered to herself as she ran. "Wait till he finds out who I really am. But I suppose I'd better fetch him his gloves and fan if I can find them." As she spoke, she came upon a tidy little house with a polished brass plaque on the door that read, "W. Rabbit." Without knocking, she stepped inside and hurried upstairs, half afraid she'd bump into the real Mary Ann and be thrown out before completing her errand. How peculiar this is, Alice mused as she climbed. Running errands for a rabbit. I suppose Dinah will be giving me orders next. "Miss Alice, fetch my brush, won't you?" And I'd reply, "In a moment, Dinah, I just need to make sure the mouse isn't getting away." But then again, she thought, Dinah probably wouldn't be allowed in the house if she started bossing people around. At the top of the stairs, she found a neat room with a table by the window. On it sat exactly what she had hoped to find, a fan and 2 or 3 pairs of small white kid gloves. She picked up a fan and 1 pair of gloves and was about to leave when she noticed a small bottle sitting beside the mirror. It had no label this time, no neat little tag saying "Drink me," but she uncorked it anyway. "Something interesting always happens when I eat or drink anything in this place," she said. "Let's see what this one does. I do hope it'll make me grow large again. I'm rather tired of being such a tiny scrap of a thing." Her wish was granted faster than she'd expected. Before she'd even finished half the bottle, her head was bumping against the ceiling. She quickly bent over to keep from snapping her neck, setting the bottle down. "Enough of that," she gasped. "I hope I don't keep growing. I can't even fit through the door now. I should have stopped sooner." But it was too late. She kept expanding, her body growing and stretching until she could no longer even kneel. In desperation, she tried lying down, curling one elbow toward the door and the other over her head. Still she grew. Eventually, she had to thrust one arm out the window and stick one foot up the chimney. "There," she sighed, "that's all I can do. Whatever happens now, I'm stuck. What on earth will become of me?" Fortunately, the magical bottle had reached the limit of its power, and she stopped growing. But it was hardly a relief. She was crammed into the room like furniture in a too small crate. "This is nothing like home," Alice groaned. "Back there, at least you're not constantly growing and shrinking and being ordered about by rodents and rabbits. I almost wish I hadn't gone down that rabbit hole." Then again, it was a curious adventure. And maybe, just maybe, someone would write a book about it someday. "When I grow up," Alice said aloud, "I'll write it myself." Then she paused. "But wait, I am grown up now, at least in size. There's certainly no room to grow any further in here." She thought a bit more. "But if I've grown up, does that mean I'll never get older? I suppose that would be nice, never turning into an old woman, but always having to do schoolwork? That would be dreadful." "Oh, silly Alice," she chided herself, "how could you learn anything in here? There's no space even for a book." Just then, she heard a voice outside. "Mary Ann. Mary Ann. Fetch my gloves this instant." Then came the sound of quick little footsteps scurrying up the stairs. Alice trembled so hard the house shook slightly. She'd forgotten she was now about 1,000 times larger than the rabbit and had absolutely no reason to be frightened of him. Moments later, she heard the rabbit rattling the doorknob. It muttered, locked. Then I'll just come in through the window. No, you won't, thought Alice. She waited until she heard the rabbit just below the window. Then, with a sudden movement, she thrust her arm outside and flailed. She didn't catch anything, but she heard a shriek, a crash of breaking glass, and concluded that the rabbit must have fallen into a greenhouse or some garden structure. Next came the rabbit's angry voice and another, unfamiliar one. Digging for apples, Your Honor. I swear. Digging for apples? Nonsense, snapped the rabbit. Come help me out of here. There was more glass breaking. Then, Pat, what's in that window? It's an arm, Your Honor. An arm, you idiot? It fills the whole window. True enough, sir. But it's still an arm. Well, it's got no business being there. Take it away. A long silence followed, then whispers floated up. I don't like it one bit. You're a coward, that's what you are. Alice, guessing what they planned, stuck her arm out again. This time, there were 2 screams and yet another crash of glass. There must be 100 greenhouses down there, Alice thought. What are they going to try now? Then she heard wheels creaking, voices murmuring, and some kind of commotion. Where's the other ladder? We didn't bring one. Well, Bill's got the other, fetch it. Tie them together. They're not long enough. Oh, it'll do. Bill, grab the rope. Is the roof strong enough? Mind the loose slates. It's coming down, watch out. Another crash. More shouts. Then, who did that? Bill, I think. Bill's going down the chimney. Poor Bill, said Alice. They always make him do the hard stuff. I wouldn't want to be Bill, not for anything. She drew her foot up the chimney, ready. As soon as she heard the scrabbling of little paws above her, she kicked hard. There was a chorus of screams. There goes Bill. Catch him, someone. Then silence. Then a burst of noise. Hold up his head. Give him brandy. Don't choke him. What happened? Alice heard a faint squeaky voice. Bill's, no doubt. Well, I can't rightly say. Something came at me like a jack-in-the-box and up I went like a rocket. So you did, old fellow. We'll have to burn the house down, came the rabbit's voice. If you do, I'll send Dinah after you. Alice bellowed. Instant silence. I wonder what they'll try next, she mused. If they had any sense, they'd just take the roof off. More murmurs. Then someone said, let's start with a barrow full. Of what? Alice didn't have to wonder long. Suddenly, small pebbles began clattering in through the windows, some of them bouncing off her face. I'll put a stop to this, she muttered, and shouted, don't you dare throw another one. Everything went quiet again. Then she noticed something odd. The pebbles were transforming into little cakes as they landed. Interesting, Alice thought. These must be magical too. If eating one of these changes my size, well, it can't make me any bigger. So she ate one. Immediately, she began shrinking. As soon as she was small enough, she dashed out the door and fled the house. A crowd of animals and birds had gathered outside, and poor little Bill the lizard was in the center, being supported by 2 guinea pigs who were feeding him from a bottle. The moment Alice appeared, they rushed at her, but she ran, darting into the woods as fast as her legs could carry her. She didn't stop until she was deep among the trees, heart pounding. "First thing to do," she panted, "is get back to my proper size. Then, find my way into that lovely garden." It was a sound plan, but she had no idea how to begin. As she searched, a sudden yelp above made her look up. A huge puppy, with eyes like dinner plates, was staring down at her, tail wagging. "Poor little thing," Alice cooed, trying to sound calm. She tried to whistle but failed miserably. Her fear that it might eat her alive wasn't easy to suppress. She grabbed a stick and held it up. The puppy sprang into the air, barking joyfully, and charged. Alice ducked behind a thistle, dodging just in time. The puppy chased the stick with clumsy delight, tumbling head over paws. It was like playing fetch with a small pony. After several chaotic laps, the puppy sat panting in the distance, tongue lolling. "This is my chance," Alice whispered, and darted away into the woods. "What a dear puppy," she sighed, catching her breath under a buttercup. "I would have loved to teach it tricks if I'd only been the right size. Oh, that reminds me, I still need to grow again." She looked around. "Something to eat or drink, I suppose, but what?" Nearby, a giant mushroom towered over her. She circled it, then stretched on tiptoe to peek over its edge. A large blue caterpillar sat atop it, arms folded, smoking a long hookah with total indifference. For a long moment, the caterpillar and Alice simply stared at one another in silence. Neither seemed in a hurry to speak. The caterpillar continued smoking its hookah calmly, exhaling slow clouds of fragrant smoke, while Alice waited, unsure whether to speak first. Finally, the caterpillar removed the hookah from its mouth and said in a lazy, drawn-out tone, "Who are you?" Alice found this to be a rather discouraging way to begin a conversation. I hardly know at the moment, sir," she stammered. "At least, I knew who I was when I woke up this morning. But since then, I've changed so many times I'm not quite sure anymore." "What do you mean by that?" asked the caterpillar, narrowing its eyes. "Explain yourself." "I'm afraid I can't explain myself, sir," said Alice, a bit flustered. "Because, you see, I'm not myself." "I don't see," replied the caterpillar. "I'm afraid I can't make it any clearer," Alice said, trying to be polite. "For the simple reason that even I don't understand it. Changing size so many times in a single day is terribly confusing." "Not a bit," said the caterpillar. "Well, maybe not for you," said Alice. "But when you've turned into a chrysalis and then into a butterfly, I imagine you'll feel a little odd, won't you?" "Not in the least," said the caterpillar. "Perhaps your experiences are different," Alice said carefully. "All I can say is, it feels quite strange to me." "You," said the caterpillar in a tone of disbelief. "Who are you?" And just like that, the conversation circled back to its starting point. Alice was growing a little irritated with the caterpillar's curt remarks. She drew herself up and said with more dignity, "Well, I think you should tell me who you are first." "Why?" asked the caterpillar, unimpressed. This was another puzzling question, and Alice found herself without a good answer. And since the caterpillar looked moody, she decided not to press the issue and began to walk away. "Come back," the caterpillar called after her. "I've something important to say." Alice paused. This sounded promising. She turned and returned to the mushroom. "Keep your temper," said the caterpillar. "Is that all?" asked Alice, biting her tongue to avoid sounding rude. "No," said the caterpillar. Alice decided it was best to wait. Perhaps, eventually, the caterpillar would say something useful. Several minutes passed as it puffed away at its hookah. Then at last, it unfolded its arms, removed the pipe, and asked, "So, you think you've changed, do you?" "I'm afraid I have, sir," said Alice. "I can't remember things the way I used to. And I don't stay the same size for 10 minutes at a time." "Can't remember what things?" the caterpillar asked. "Well, I tried to recite 'How doth the little busy bee,' but it came out all wrong," Alice replied, sighing. "Recite 'You are old,' Father William," instructed the caterpillar. Alice folded her hands and began. "You are old, Father William," the young man said. "And your hair has become very white. Yet you constantly stand on your head. Do you think, at your age, that is right?" "In my youth," Father William replied to his son, "I feared it might injure the brain. But now that I'm certain I have none, why, I do it again and again." "You are old," said the youth, "as I mentioned before. And you've grown uncommonly fat. Yet you turned a back somersault through the door. Pray, what is the reason for that?" "In my youth," said the sage, "I kept all my limbs very supple by use of this balm. 1 shilling the box. Allow me to sell you a couple, to take home in your palm." "You are old," said the youth, "and your jaws are too weak for anything tougher than suet. Yet you finished the goose with the bones and the beak. Pray, how did you manage to do it?" "In my youth," said his father, "I took to the law. And I argued each case with my wife. The vigor it gave to my jaw, I have found, has lasted me all my life." "You are old," said the youth, "and one would suppose your eye was as steady as stone. Yet you balanced an eel on the end of your nose. What made you so clever, alone?" "I have answered 3 questions, and that is enough," said his father. "Don't give yourself airs. Do you think I can listen all day to such stuff? Be off, or I'll kick you downstairs." "That's not right," said the caterpillar. "Not quite, I admit," said Alice. "Some of the lines got twisted, I think." "It's wrong from beginning to end," said the caterpillar flatly. There was a heavy pause. Then, finally, it asked, "What size do you want to be?" "Oh, I'm not particular," Alice said quickly. "I just don't enjoy changing so much." "I don't see the problem," said the caterpillar. Alice held back a sigh. "Well, maybe you've never had to experience it." "Are you content now?" the caterpillar asked. "I'd like to be a little larger, if you don't mind," said Alice cautiously. 3 inches is such a miserable height to be." "It's a very fine height," snapped the caterpillar, who happened to be exactly 3 inches tall. "But I'm not used to it," Alice pleaded, slightly alarmed. "You'll get used to it in time," the caterpillar grumbled, putting the hookah back into its mouth and resuming its puffing. Alice waited patiently. After a minute or two, the caterpillar took the hookah out again, yawned, stretched, and then slowly slid off the mushroom. "One side will make you taller," it said, "and the other side will make you shorter." "One side of what?" Alice asked aloud. "The mushroom," said the caterpillar, as if she should have known. Then it vanished into the grass. Alice looked thoughtfully at the mushroom. Since it was perfectly round, she couldn't tell which was which side. She stretched her arms around it and broke off 2 small pieces, one from each edge. "Now, which is which?" she said, and nibbled the right-hand bit. Instantly, her chin slammed into her toes. She had shrunk so fast she barely had time to gasp. Panicked but determined, she reached for the other piece and took a bite. Her chin was pressed so tight to her feet that she couldn't open her mouth. She wiggled, squirmed, and at last managed to get a crumb in. In a flash, she began growing again. "Ah, much better," she sighed until she realized her shoulders were gone. All she could see was a neck long, thin, and towering over the treetops. Her hands had vanished from view entirely. "Oh no! Where are my shoulders? And my hands?" She tried to move her arms, but the only result was a rustling in the distant leaves far below. She couldn't bring her hands to her head, so she tried to lower her head instead. To her surprise, her neck bent easily in any direction. Like a snake, she thought. How curious. She managed to twist her neck into a graceful zigzag and began to dip into the canopy of leaves to find her shoulders. But just as she was about to disappear among the branches, a sudden hiss stopped her. A large pigeon flapped into her face, beating its wings furiously. "Serpent!" it shrieked. "I'm not a serpent!" Alice cried indignantly. "Leave me alone!" "Serpent, I say again," the pigeon insisted, though its tone was softer this time. It added, sniffling, "I've tried every way, but nothing works." "I have no idea what you mean," said Alice. "Roots, banks, hedges, I've tried them all," the pigeon wailed. "These wretched serpents. They're relentless." Alice was completely baffled, but thought it best to let the pigeon finish. As if laying eggs wasn't enough trouble, it sobbed, "Now I have to be on constant guard day and night. I haven't slept in 3 weeks." "I'm sorry you're upset," Alice said gently, beginning to understand. "And I had just chosen the highest tree in the whole forest, finally thought I was safe, when bam. A serpent again." "But I'm not a serpent," Alice insisted. "I'm a little girl." "Ha," said the pigeon, eyes narrowing. "I've seen many little girls in my time, but none with necks like that." "You're a serpent, no use denying it." Alice started to protest, but the pigeon wasn't finished. "And I suppose you'll tell me next you've never eaten an egg?" "Well, I have eaten eggs," admitted Alice truthfully. "But little girls eat eggs just as often as serpents do." "I don't believe you," the pigeon snapped. "Little girls are just another kind of serpent, that's all." That struck Alice as such a new and strange idea that she didn't speak for a moment. "You're here for eggs, aren't you?" "I know it," said the pigeon suspiciously. "Well, I don't care if you're a serpent or a girl, you're not getting mine." "I'm not after your eggs," Alice said quickly. "And even if I were, I don't eat them raw." "Then be off," the pigeon huffed, settling back into its nest. Alice carefully crept down through the trees, untangling her impossibly long neck from the branches. As she did, she remembered she was still holding the 2 pieces of mushroom. Nibbling first one, then the other, she began adjusting her size, taller, then shorter, until she finally reached a sensible height again. It felt strange at first, but within a few moments, she had adjusted. Well, she said to herself, that's one part of the plan sorted. Now to find that beautiful garden. As she stepped into a clearing, she saw a little house, no more than 4 feet high. Whoever lives there, I mustn't approach like this. I'll frighten them. She took another bite of the right-hand mushroom until she shrank down to 9 inches tall, just right. For a minute or two, Alice stood staring at the little house, wondering what to do next. Just then, a footman in a fine livery burst out of the woods and marched up to the front door. Alice immediately decided he must be a footman, not just because of his elaborate uniform, but because his face, if judged alone, looked peculiarly like a fish. He rapped at the door with his knuckles. It was opened by another footman, equally dressed but frog-faced, with wide, blank eyes and a curiously placid expression. Both footmen wore powdered wigs that curled down over their shoulders, and Alice was filled with curiosity. She crept a little closer, staying among the trees to listen. The fish footman pulled a large envelope from beneath his arm, nearly the size of himself, and handed it over to the frog footman with great formality. For the Duchess, he declared. An invitation from the Queen to play croquet. The frog footman received the envelope just as gravely and echoed the message, though he slightly jumbled the order, from the Queen. An invitation for the Duchess to play croquet. Then they bowed so low their wigs tangled together. Alice couldn't help bursting into laughter and had to dart back behind the trees to avoid being spotted. When she peeped out again, the fish footman had vanished, and the frog footman was sitting on the doorstep, staring dreamily up at the sky. Alice approached timidly and knocked. "No use knocking," said the footman, without lowering his gaze. "2 reasons. First, because I'm on the same side of the door as you. Second, because the noise inside is so loud, no one would hear you anyway." And indeed, a dreadful racket could be heard from within, pots and pans clanging, someone sneezing violently, and a baby howling without pause. "Please, then," said Alice, "how am I to get in?" "There might be some sense in knocking," the footman continued, entirely ignoring her question, "if we were on opposite sides of the door. For instance, if you were inside, and I was out, then you might knock, and I could let you out. You see?" He still hadn't looked down. His eyes remained glued to the sky. "That's awfully rude," thought Alice. "But perhaps he can't help it, his eyes are practically on the top of his head." Aloud, she repeated firmly, "How am I to get in?" "I shall sit here," said the footman, "for days and days." "But what am I to do?" Alice asked. "Anything you like," said the footman. And then, as if to end the conversation, he began to whistle softly. "This is hopeless," Alice muttered. And without waiting any longer, she turned the knob and walked right in. The door led straight into a smoky kitchen so thick with pepper that Alice sneezed instantly. It seemed to hang in the air like a fog. In the center, on a 3-legged stool, sat the Duchess, cradling a howling baby. Over by the stove, a cook stirred a cauldron of soup so fiercely it sloshed over the sides, steam mingling with the already peppery air. There's far too much pepper in that soup, thought Alice. Even the Duchess was sneezing every now and then. The baby sneezed constantly, its wailing never ceasing for even a second. The only one who didn't sneeze was a large cat curled on the hearth rug, grinning from ear to ear. Alice, trying to be polite, stepped forward and said, "Would you mind telling me why your cat grins like that?" "It's a Cheshire cat," the Duchess replied. "That's why." "Pig." She yelled the last word so suddenly that Alice jumped until she realized the exclamation was directed at the baby, not her. "I didn't know Cheshire cats always grinned," said Alice. "In fact, I didn't even know they could." "They all can," said the Duchess, "and most of them do." "I've never seen one that did," Alice replied, trying to be diplomatic. "You don't know much," snapped the Duchess. "And that's a fact." Alice didn't like the tone and decided to steer the conversation elsewhere. But before she could speak again, the cook suddenly flung the cauldron off the fire and began hurling everything within reach, frying pans, plates, ladles, straight across the kitchen. Most of them were aimed in the direction of the Duchess and the baby. The Duchess paid no attention. Even when a pan glanced off her shoulder, she didn't so much as flinch. As for the baby, it shrieked louder than ever. "Oh, do be careful!" Alice cried, dodging a particularly large saucepan. "You'll take the poor child's nose off." If everyone minded their own business, the Duchess grumbled, the world would go round a lot faster. "Which wouldn't be much of an improvement," Alice said, seizing the opportunity to show off a little knowledge. "You see, the Earth takes 24 hours to complete a full turn on its axis." "Talking of axes," interrupted the Duchess, "chop off her head." Alice glanced nervously at the cook, wondering if she intended to act on the suggestion. But the cook was still focused entirely on her soup. 24 hours, I think," Alice began again, trying to collect her thoughts. "Or maybe it's 12, oh, don't bother me with numbers," said the Duchess. "I hate arithmetic." Then she began to sing to the baby, shaking it roughly at the end of each line. The cook and the baby joined in the chorus, and Alice strained to make out the words. "Speak roughly to your little boy, and beat him when he sneezes. He only does it to annoy, because he knows it teases." The chorus followed with, "Wow! Wow! Wow! I'm not staying for another verse," thought Alice. But before she could make a polite excuse, the Duchess flung the baby into Alice's arms and announced, "Here, you hold it. I must get ready for croquet with the Queen." And she swept out of the room. A frying pan narrowly missed her head as she exited. Alice caught the baby, but not easily. It was a bizarre little creature, limbs flailing in all directions like a starfish, snorting like a steam engine. She struggled to hold it, and after several failed attempts, discovered the only way was to twist it up like a bundle and keep a tight grip on its right ear and left foot. "I've got to take it with me," Alice decided. "If I leave it here, they'll kill it. Surely that would be murder." The baby grunted in response. "That's no way to speak," Alice scolded. "You need to learn some manners." It grunted again. Alice peered into its face. Its nose was turning up quite sharply, more like a snout than anything, and its eyes were shrinking. "Maybe it's just crying," Alice thought hopefully. But no, there were no tears. "If you're going to turn into a pig," she said gravely, I'll have nothing more to do with you." The baby made another rude grunt. They walked in silence for a while. Then the baby gave such a violent grunt that Alice looked down and gasped. There was no doubt now. It had become a pig. "Well," said Alice, setting it gently on the ground, "you're better off as a pig than a baby. It would have made a dreadful child, but it's not a bad-looking pig." She watched it trot away into the woods, tail twitching, and began to reflect on other children she knew who might make equally good pigs if properly transformed. Just then, she was startled to see a grinning cat seated on the branch of a tree nearby. It was the Cheshire Cat. It grinned when it saw her, and Alice thought it looked quite friendly, though its claws were long and its teeth even longer, so she felt it wise to be respectful. "Cheshire Puss," she began, timidly. She wasn't sure if it would appreciate the name, but the cat only grinned wider. "Good, it's not offended," thought Alice. "Would you tell me, please, which way I ought to go from here?" "That depends a great deal on where you want to get to," said the cat. "I don't much care where," said Alice. "Then it doesn't matter which way you go," the cat replied. "As long as I get somewhere," Alice added, trying to clarify. "Oh, you're sure to do that," said the cat. "If you walk long enough." Alice sensed the logic, though it didn't really help. "What sort of people live around here?" she asked. "In that direction," said the cat, waving its right paw, "lives a hatter. And in that direction, waving the left, lives a March hare. Visit either you like, they're both mad." "But I don't want to go among mad people," Alice protested. "You can't help that," said the cat. "We're all mad here." "I'm mad." "You're mad." "How do you know I'm mad?" Alice asked. "You must be," said the cat, "or you wouldn't have come here." Alice didn't think that proved anything, but she let it slide. "And how do you know you're mad?" she challenged. "To begin with," said the cat, "a dog's not mad, right?" "I suppose not," Alice agreed. "Well then," the cat continued, "a dog growls when it's angry and wags its tail when it's happy. I growl when I'm happy and wag my tail when I'm angry. Therefore, I'm mad." "That's not growling," Alice objected. "It's purring." "Call it what you like," said the cat. "Do you plan to play croquet with the Queen today?" "I'd like to," Alice said. "But I haven't been invited yet." "You'll see me there," said the cat. And vanished. Alice wasn't particularly surprised. She was getting quite used to odd things by now. As she looked at the empty air where the cat had been, it suddenly reappeared. "By the way," it said, "what became of the baby?" "It turned into a pig," Alice replied, calmly. "I almost forgot to mention." "I thought it would," said the cat, and disappeared again. There was a table set under a tree in front of the house, and the March Hare and the Hatter were having tea. A dormouse sat between them, fast asleep, and the other two were using it as a cushion, resting their elbows on it and talking over its head. Very uncomfortable for the dormouse, thought Alice. But it doesn't seem to mind. The table was large, but all three were squished together at one end. "No room! No room!" they cried out when they spotted Alice approaching. "There's plenty of room," said Alice indignantly, and she sat down in a large armchair at the end. "Have some wine," offered the March Hare. Alice looked around the table but saw nothing but tea. "I don't see any wine," she said. "There isn't any," the March Hare admitted. "Then why did you offer it?" Alice demanded, annoyed. "It seemed polite," said the hare. Alice was not sure how to respond, so she picked up a teacup. "Your hair needs cutting," said the Hatter abruptly. Alice had had enough. "You shouldn't make personal remarks. It's rude." The Hatter opened his eyes wide. "Why is a raven like a writing desk?" he asked. "That's a riddle," Alice said, intrigued. "I believe I can guess the answer." "Do you mean that you think you can find it out," said the March Hare, "or that you think you know the answer?" "It's the same thing," said Alice. "Not at all," said the Hatter. "You might just as well say that I see what I eat is the same as I eat what I see." "You might just as well say," added the Hare, "I like what I get is the same as I get what I like." "You might just as well say," chimed in the Dormouse, half asleep, "I breathe when I sleep is the same as I sleep when I breathe." "It is the same thing with you," said the Hatter, and they all burst into laughter. Alice was too puzzled to say anything, so she took another sip of tea. "What day of the month is it?" the Hatter asked. He pulled out his watch and shook it beside his ear, then frowned. "4th," said Alice. "2 days wrong," the Hatter groaned. "I told you butter wouldn't fix it," he added, glaring at the Hare. "It was the best butter," the Hare mumbled. "Yes, but you mustn't have used the bread knife, it probably had crumbs," the Hatter replied irritably. The Hare took the watch and dipped it into his cup of tea, peering at it like a scientist examining an artifact. "It was the best butter," he repeated solemnly. Alice leaned forward. "What a funny watch. It tells the day but not the hour." "Why should it?" muttered the Hatter. "Does your watch tell you what year it is?" "Of course not," said Alice promptly. "But that's because it stays the same year for quite a while." "Exactly," the Hatter said triumphantly. Alice was still trying to understand this when the Hatter continued, "Have you guessed the riddle yet?" "No, I give up," she replied. "What's the answer?" "I haven't the slightest idea," said the Hatter. "Nor I," said the March Hare. Alice sighed. "You might do something better with the time than waste it on riddles with no answers." "If you knew time like I do," said the Hatter, "you wouldn't talk about wasting it." "It's him." "I don't understand," said Alice. "Of course you don't," the Hatter cried. "I dare say you've never even spoken to time." "Perhaps not," said Alice cautiously. "But I know how to keep time when I learn music." "Ah! That accounts for it," the Hatter declared. "He won't stand being kept. Now, if only you were on good terms with time, he'd do anything you asked. For example, suppose it were 9 o'clock and time for lessons. You'd only need to whisper to time, and off he'd go 1:30, just like that." "That would be grand," said Alice, thinking of all the lessons she could skip. "Wouldn't it just," said the Hatter with a gleam in his eye. "But how does time get stuck?" Alice asked. "Well," the Hatter said, leaning closer, "it was at the Queen's concert. I had to sing 'Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Bat,' and I hadn't finished the first verse when she yelled, 'He's murdering the time.' Off with his head. And ever since then, time won't do anything I say. It's always 6 o'clock now." Alice looked at the table and noticed an abundance of teacups. Is that why there are so many tea things out? Exactly, said the Hatter. It's always tea time, so we just keep moving round the table. But what happens when you go all the way around? Alice asked. We just start over, said the Hare. Suppose we change the subject, Alice suggested. I'm tired of this conversation. I vote the young lady tell us a story, said the Hare. I don't know any, Alice said hesitantly. Then the Dormouse shall tell us one, they both cried. They shook the Dormouse awake, poured tea over its nose, and propped it up. The Dormouse blinked sleepily. I wasn't asleep, it murmured. I heard every word. Tell us a story, said the Hare. Yes, do, Alice added. And be quick about it, urged the Hatter, or you'll fall asleep before you finish. Once upon a time, the Dormouse began in a dreamy voice. There were 3 little sisters, and their names were Elsie, Lacey, and Tilly, and they lived at the bottom of a well. What did they live on? Asked Alice, always curious. They lived on treacle, said the Dormouse. They couldn't have, Alice said firmly. They'd have gotten ill. They did get ill, said the Dormouse. Alice tried not to argue. But why were they living at the bottom of a well? It was a treacle well, said the Dormouse. There's no such thing. Alice insisted. If you can't be civil, finish the story yourself, snapped the Dormouse. No, no, please go on, said Alice. They were learning to draw, the Dormouse continued. They drew all sorts of things, everything that begins with M. Why M? Asked Alice. Why not? Said the March Hare. Alice was silent. Mice, and moons, and memory, and muchness, you know you say things are much of a muchness? Did you ever see such a thing as a drawing of a muchness? I don't think Alice began. Then you shouldn't talk, said the Hatter. This was too much. Alice rose and walked off in a huff. The others didn't seem to notice. They had started trying to stuff the Dormouse into the teapot. At least they didn't try to keep me in the pot, Alice thought. She wandered into the woods, muttering, what a silly tea party. I'll never go back there again. Just ahead, she spotted a door nestled in a tree trunk. That's curious, she said aloud. She tried the handle, it opened easily. Inside, she found herself back in the long hallway, with the glass table still standing in the center. I've been here before, she cried, this time much more confident. She took up the mushroom pieces she had saved, nibbled the right amount to shrink, grabbed the golden key, and finally opened the little door. She stepped into a glorious garden filled with brightly colored flowers and neat rows of hedges. Oh, how lovely! Alice sighed, walking through the gates at last. A grand rose tree stood just beside the garden path. Its blooms were white, but 3 card-shaped gardeners were feverishly painting them red. Alice found this quite peculiar. She approached, watching as the one labeled 2 leaned over to whisper to 5, she doesn't know we're painting them. Better keep your voice down, said 7, glancing around nervously. Why are you painting those roses? Alice asked aloud. The cards jumped in alarm. 2 and 5 dropped their brushes, 7 stood frozen. After a short pause, 2 muttered, Miss, you see, the Queen ordered red roses. But someone planted white ones by mistake, and if she finds out, we'll all lose our heads. So, added 5, we're trying to fix it before she comes. Alice felt sorry for them. Just then, a trumpet blared. "Here she comes," cried the gardeners in unison, and they threw themselves flat on their faces. Alice turned to see a most peculiar procession approaching. First came 10 soldiers with clubs for bodies, carrying spears and marching in pairs. Then 10 courtiers, all diamonds, followed by 10 royals with hearts decorating their clothing. Next came the Knave of Hearts, holding the royal crown on a velvet cushion. Last of all, the King and Queen of Hearts. Alice had never seen such curious people. The cards' heads and feet were set in the corners of their flat bodies, and they moved stiffly, like marionettes. As the procession neared, everyone dropped to the ground except Alice. She wasn't sure it was proper to lie face down, so she remained standing. "Who is this?" the Queen asked sharply, pointing at Alice. Alice replied without fear, "My name is Alice, Your Majesty." The Queen frowned. "And who are those lying down?" "They're just the gardeners," said Alice, stepping protectively in front of them. "They were painting the roses red because they—" "Off with their heads!" roared the Queen. Alice was shocked. "Nonsense," she said loudly. The Queen gasped, clearly unused to being contradicted. The King stepped in. "Consider, my dear, she's only a child." The Queen growled but said nothing. "Turn them over," she barked after a moment. The soldiers flipped the gardeners onto their backs with their feet. "Get up," she snapped. The 3 gardeners scrambled to their feet, trembling. "Leave my sight," the Queen barked. The trio bolted, trying to escape. "Bring them back," the Queen shouted. The soldiers gave chase, while the Queen turned her attention back to Alice. "Do you play croquet?" "Yes," Alice replied eagerly. "Come, then," commanded the Queen. Alice joined the procession, hoping the game would be fun. As they walked, she noticed the Queen frequently shouting, "Off with his head," or "Off with hers," at anyone who crossed her. "This Queen is absolutely mad," Alice whispered to herself. But everyone seems too frightened to disagree. Soon, they arrived at a peculiar croquet ground. The balls were live hedgehogs. The mallets? Flamingos. Even the arches were soldiers bent double. The whole thing was chaos. Everyone played at once, never waiting turns. The flamingos were uncooperative, constantly lifting their heads to look at Alice or trying to run away. The hedgehogs would uncurl and scurry off in the wrong direction. Arches walked away at random. Alice thought the entire game a disaster. Yet, she played along. She was just trying to figure out how to manage her flamingo when the Queen shouted, "Off with her head," again. Who's she condemning now? Alice muttered, glancing around. This time, it was one of the courtiers who had dared sneeze during her shot. Just then, Alice heard a soft voice behind her. "You seem quite composed," it said. Turning, Alice found the Cheshire Cat lounging in the air again, grinning as usual. "I'm doing my best," Alice whispered. "But this game is wild. No rules, everyone shouting, flamingos everywhere." "Would you like me to distract the Queen?" the cat offered. "Thank you," said Alice, "but I think I'll manage." At that moment, the King spotted the cat. I don't like the look of that creature, he exclaimed. It's the Cheshire Cat, Alice explained. He's allowed to be here. He doesn't have a body, the king cried. He's just a head. Exactly why I like him, the queen said, narrowing her eyes. Off with its head, the king demanded. Nonsense, the queen muttered. But, your majesty, it's just a floating grin and a few whiskers. Fetch the executioner, the queen commanded. A moment later, the executioner arrived, axe in hand, and stopped short. Can't chop off a head if there's no body, he mumbled. The king insisted, it's a head, it must be removed. The executioner, clearly flustered, turned to the queen. Your majesty, without a neck to guide the blow. Ask Alice, the queen barked. But Alice had already wandered off, chasing a runaway hedgehog. When the queen finally tracked her down, she was shouting again. You must meet the mock turtle, she declared. He's terribly sad and enjoys company. I'd like that, said Alice. So the queen turned to a nearby soldier. Take this girl to see the mock turtle, she ordered. They walked in silence for a time, the soldier glancing nervously over his shoulder. You needn't worry, Alice said kindly. I don't bite. The soldier smiled sheepishly. It's not you I fear, it's Her Majesty. Soon, they arrived at a cliff overlooking the sea. Sitting on a rock was a creature with the body of a turtle and the head, hooves, and tail of a calf. It wept into a handkerchief made of seaweed. This is the mock turtle, said the soldier, then turned and ran. The mock turtle looked up. So, you've come to hear my story, he said through sniffles. Yes, please, said Alice gently. The creature took a deep breath and began. You can't imagine how miserable I am, the mock turtle began, dabbing at his eyes with a flipper. I was once a real turtle. These words were followed by an extended silence. Alice was unsure whether to respond. Finally, she asked, What happened to you? The mock turtle sighed heavily. When we were little, he continued, we went to school in the sea. The master was an old turtle, we used to call him Tortoise. Why did you call him Tortoise, if he was a turtle? Alice asked, puzzled. We called him Tortoise, said the mock turtle, because he taught us. Get it? Alice laughed politely. Oh, I see now. We had the best education, the mock turtle added proudly. In fact, we went to school every single day. I've been to school, Alice said. It's not so unusual. Yes, but have you ever had lessons in the sea? Asked the mock turtle with a tone of superiority. No, Alice admitted. Then you can't understand the excellence of our curriculum. What subjects did you study? She inquired. Well, the mock turtle said, counting off on his flippers, reeling and writhing, of course, came first, then the different branches of arithmetic, ambition, distraction, uglification, and derision. I've never heard of those before, said Alice. You must not have had very thorough schooling, the mock turtle sniffed. What else did you learn? Alice asked, trying to change the subject. French, of course, said the mock turtle. And music. And washing, extraordinary subject. You wouldn't believe how much there is to know about washing. Certainly more than I realized, said Alice. We also studied drawing, stretching, and fainting in coils, he added, glancing proudly at the griffin who had just arrived. What's fainting in coils? Alice asked. It's what you do when you lie artistically on the rocks, said the griffin, stretching out his wings lazily. We had the best instructors. The master taught laughing in grief. The drawing master was an old crab, actually. Indeed, said Alice, trying to imagine it. We called him her crab, the mock turtle said with a hint of reverence. He came once a week, teaching us to draw with our claws. You must have had an interesting time, said Alice, who was beginning to wonder if they were teasing her. Oh, it was an intense curriculum, said the mock turtle, we had to work so hard. 10 hours the first day, 9 the next, and so on. What happens on the 11th day? Alice asked, curious. That's when the school's out for holiday, said the griffin, giving her a wink. Alice smiled. That sounds fair. Now, tell her about the games we used to play, said the griffin. The mock turtle brightened. Ah yes, we had games called lobster quadrille. Alice's ears perked up. What's that? You'll see, said the griffin. Come on, we'll show you. They led her down to a flat area by the beach. The griffin clapped his claws, and the mock turtle began singing a slow, mournful tune. Will you walk a little faster? Said a whiting to a snail. There's a porpoise close behind us, and he's treading on my tail. See how eagerly the lobsters and the turtles all advance. They are waiting on the shingle, will you come and join the dance? Alice clapped her hands. What a lovely song, she exclaimed. Would you like to see the steps? The griffin offered. Yes, please, said Alice, excited. The two creatures began performing a very odd dance, skipping about with great seriousness and occasional stumbles. Alice watched with delight. When they finished, the mock turtle bowed dramatically. Would you like to hear another song? He asked. Oh, yes, very much, Alice said. This one is called Turtle Soup, he announced. He took a deep breath and sang in his melancholy voice. Beautiful soup, so rich and green, waiting in a hot tureen. Who for such dainties would not stoop? Soup of the evening, beautiful soup. Soup of the evening, beautiful soup. Alice applauded politely, though she felt the song was rather silly. The mock turtle looked pleased nonetheless. You've no idea how moving it is to perform before an audience again, he said, sniffling. Just then, a distant call rang through the air. Come quickly. The trial's beginning. It was a voice calling from somewhere behind the trees. What trial? Alice asked. Follow and see, said the griffin, seizing her hand with his talon. The mock turtle called after them, don't forget to come back and dance again. They raced off through the forest, the griffin flapping his wings, Alice running beside him. As they neared a clearing, they saw an enormous crowd gathered in front of a makeshift courtroom. Alice's heart thumped. Something exciting was clearly about to unfold. Who's on trial? She asked breathlessly. The Knave of Hearts, the griffin said. He's been accused of stealing the Queen's tarts. Oh, dear, said Alice, suddenly recalling the nursery rhyme. They reached the courtroom steps, and Alice climbed up behind the rows of spectators. In the middle sat the King and Queen of Hearts on their thrones. The knave stood in chains before them, looking sulky. A table stood in the center, and on it, a large platter of tarts gleamed temptingly. The White Rabbit, dressed now as a herald, blew his trumpet and unrolled a scroll. The Queen of Hearts, she made some tarts, all on a summer day. The Knave of Hearts, he stole those tarts, and took them quite away. The trial had officially begun. The jury, a dozen assorted animals and birds, busied themselves scribbling notes on slates, even though the trial hadn't yet produced any evidence. Alice watched with wide eyes. "This will be absurd," she muttered, squeezing between a pair of guinea pigs to get a better view. The first witness was called the Hatter. He approached the stand nervously, still carrying a teacup in one hand and a piece of bread in the other. "You ought to have finished your tea," said the king. "When did you begin?" he asked sharply. The Hatter stammered. 14th of March, I think it was after I began whistling to the Queen's cat." "Take off your hat," the Queen interrupted. "It isn't mine," said the Hatter meekly. The jury wrote that down. The king eyed him suspiciously. "You must not waste our time." "I'm a poor man, your Majesty," said the Hatter. "You should have been better prepared," said the king. "Suppose we have the next witness," the Queen growled. The cook was brought in, clutching her pepper pot tightly. "What are the tarts made of?" asked the king. "Pepper mostly," said the cook. "Chop off her head," roared the Queen. But the cook had already vanished. Alice laughed, louder than she meant to. "Silence in court," the White Rabbit shouted. Alice was startled to realize she was growing again. "Oh no," she thought, "this could be awkward." She tried crouching behind the jury box but only knocked over half the panel. "Never mind," said the king, adjusting his crown. "Let's proceed." The king cleared his throat and announced, "Call the next witness." The White Rabbit blew his trumpet and shouted, "Alice." "Here," cried Alice, forgetting in her surprise that she had grown to nearly full size again. She leapt up so suddenly that she knocked over the jury box entirely, sending jurors tumbling in all directions. "Oh! I'm terribly sorry," she exclaimed, bending down to gather them up. The animals squeaked and flapped as she picked them up one by one and returned them to their seats. The king frowned. "Have you finished reorganizing the jury?" "Yes, your Majesty," Alice replied politely. "Then take the stand," he ordered. Alice did as she was told, standing tall now, towering over the court. The jurors whispered among themselves, clearly uncomfortable with her looming presence. The king adjusted his spectacles and peered at a scroll. "What do you know about this matter?" he asked. "Nothing," said Alice. "Nothing whatever," the king pressed. "Nothing whatever," Alice confirmed. "That's very important," said the king, turning to the jury. But the White Rabbit, who had been reading the list of charges, stood up nervously. "Your Majesty means unimportant, of course." "Important, unimportant, semantics," the king said, waving his hand. The Queen slammed her fist on the armrest. "Sentence first, verdict afterward." "What nonsense," said Alice loudly. The Queen turned purple. "Hold your tongue." "No," said Alice. "Off with her head," shrieked the Queen. "Who cares?" Alice shouted back, drawing herself up to full height. "You're nothing but a pack of cards." At that moment, the entire court rose into the air, spinning wildly around her. The king and queen, the soldiers and jurors, even the courtroom itself, dissolved into a blur. And then, silence. The courtroom was in an uproar as Alice looked around, still towering over the jury. The king banged his gavel and shouted, "Order! Order in the court!" The white rabbit, now red-faced and flustered, fumbled with a long parchment and blew his trumpet before announcing, "The trial resumes. First witness, the Hatter." The Hatter stumbled to the stand, nervously twisting his hat in his hands. He looked around as if searching for an escape route. "You ought to have finished your tea," said the king sternly. "When did you begin?" he demanded. The Hatter wiped his forehead. 14th of March, I think," he said, then glanced over at the queen, who was glaring furiously. "It was right after I began whistling. You see, I was singing 'Twinkle, Twinkle.'" "Take off your hat," snapped the king. "It isn't mine," the Hatter muttered. "I'm only keeping it on behalf of someone else." "Give your evidence," the king said. The Hatter continued, "I was drinking tea when the knave came in. He didn't say a word, just took a tart and walked out." "You saw this?" the queen interjected. "Well, not exactly," the Hatter stammered, "but I suspected. I mean, we were all there." The jury scribbled furiously on their slates. One of them squeaked his chalk so loudly that the dormouse woke up with a start and muttered something about treacle before dozing off again. "That's enough," the king said. "Step down." "I'd rather finish my tea," the Hatter murmured, backing away. "You may go," said the king. The Hatter turned and ran from the courtroom, forgetting his hat entirely. "Next witness," the white rabbit called. The cook marched in, holding a pepper pot and glaring at everyone. "What are tarts made of?" asked the king. "Pepper, mostly," said the cook, gruffly. "Anything else?" "Vinegar." "No sugar?" "Certainly not," she snapped. The king looked baffled. "No matter," he said. "You may stand down." "I'd rather stand out," the cook muttered and marched off before anyone could stop her. Alice shifted uncomfortably. She felt herself growing again, this time faster than before. Her arms and legs lengthened, and her head now hovered above the courtroom banners. "Now, let's hear from the next witness," the white rabbit announced, glancing nervously upward at her. "Who is it?" asked the king. The white rabbit checked his scroll and gasped. "Alice." Alice stepped forward, wondering what on earth they expected her to say. She had no idea what was going on, but everyone seemed to think she had something important to contribute. "What do you know about this business?" asked the king. "Nothing," Alice said honestly. "Nothing at all?" "Nothing whatsoever," she confirmed. The king sighed. "Well, that's very important." The white rabbit stepped in. "Your Majesty probably means it's not important." "Semantics again," the king huffed. "She's on trial now." "Wait, I'm on trial?" Alice asked. The queen rose to her feet. "Sentence first, verdict afterward," she roared. "That's absurd," said Alice. "You can't have the sentence before the verdict." "Hold your tongue," shouted the queen. "I won't," Alice said defiantly. The queen's eyes blazed. "Off with her head." But Alice was no longer frightened. She had grown so tall that the entire court barely reached her knees. She looked around, arms folded. "You're nothing but a deck of cards," she said, her voice echoing. And suddenly, everything changed. The cards flew up into the air, swirling around her like a storm. The queen, the king, the jurors all rose in a whirlwind of fluttering faces and symbols. Alice covered her face as they swooped down toward her. The whirlwind of cards swirled higher and faster around Alice. She ducked, shielding her face with both arms as the queen's screech echoed through the storm of hearts, spades, diamonds, and clubs. "Off with her head!" The cards descended in a chaotic flurry, some tumbling, others swooping like birds. Alice stood her ground, still towering above them, not frightened anymore. She realized now they couldn't actually hurt her. "You're just a pack of paper," she shouted, her voice firm and full of clarity. The cards stopped mid-air. For a split second, everything froze. And then everything dissolved. The entire courtroom faded. The banners, the thrones, the white rabbit's trumpet, even the queen's furious scowl, all disappeared into mist. The air grew still. Alice blinked. She was no longer standing in a courtroom. She was lying under a tree, her head resting in her sister's lap. The sun was warm on her face. A soft breeze tickled her cheeks, and somewhere nearby, a bird sang lazily. "Alice, dear," her sister's voice said gently, "wake up." Alice rubbed her eyes. "Oh, I was having the most curious dream." Her sister smiled. "Were you, now?" Alice sat up slowly. The dream still clung to her like cobwebs, so vivid, so strange. "There was a white rabbit," she began, eyes bright, "with a waistcoat and a watch and a hole, and I followed it, and then there was a hall with doors, and a little bottle that said 'drink me.'" She rattled on excitedly, telling her sister about the pool of tears, the mouse and the birds, the caterpillar on a mushroom, the Cheshire cat, the tea party, the queen, the court, and of course, the deck of cards flying at her face. Her sister listened patiently, brushing back Alice's hair. "What an imagination," she said fondly. But Alice wasn't listening. She had stood up now, hands on her hips, gazing at the golden fields around them. "Do you think," she asked suddenly, "any of it could be real?" Her sister laughed softly. "That's something for dreamers to decide." Alice didn't respond. She was already skipping off through the meadow, the flowers brushing her dress, the breeze catching her hair. Her sister remained beneath the tree, watching her disappear into the sunshine. And then, quietly, she closed her own eyes and began to dream as well. She dreamed of Alice, grown tall and thoughtful, still full of wonder, still with sparkling eyes. She dreamed of Alice's voice telling stories to children, who would listen wide-eyed and curious, leaning close with eager faces. She dreamed that long after the summer afternoon had passed, the strange and beautiful world her sister had found would live on, not just in dreams, but in hearts. In the rustling of the grass. In the dance of the flowers. In the secret smile of a white rabbit with a pocket watch. And with that thought, the world around her softened into golden silence. Alice's sister sat still beneath the tree, the gentle rustle of leaves mingling with the hum of bees and the distant lark's call. Her eyes remained closed, her thoughts lingering on the dream Alice had just described. Though she smiled at her little sister's imagination, she found herself slipping into that same dream, slowly and sweetly, as if lulled by the rhythm of the summer day. In her mind's eye, she saw the white rabbit scurrying once more, watch and paw, muttering about being late. She followed him again through that curious tunnel into a land where logic twisted and wonder bloomed like wildflowers. She saw the shrinking corridors, the door too small to enter, and the bottle that sparkled with mystery. She saw Alice growing, shrinking, swimming in tears, and finding friendship in the unlikeliest creatures, a dodo, a mouse, a caterpillar whose smoke curled like riddles in the air. The landscape of Alice's tale unfolded before her, as vivid and strange as if it had been her own. The grin of the Cheshire Cat hung in the sky like a crescent moon. The tea party with the Mad Hatter and March Hare looped endlessly, a clock forever stuck at 6. She heard the Queen shout her terrible decree, off with their heads, and saw Alice standing firm, tall and fearless before a crowd of playing cards turned wild. And in that court of nonsense and noise, her sister felt the pulse of something deeper, a child's courage, an explorer's heart, a curiosity unafraid of the absurd. She saw her sister not just in the moment, but across years to come. She imagined Alice as a young woman, still wide-eyed and wise, still chasing butterflies of thought, still listening for laughter behind leaves, or secrets in shadows. She imagined her surrounded by children of her own, who would sit at her feet, eager to hear of the caterpillar's hookah, the lobster quadrille, or the cake that made you grow tall. And Alice would smile that same knowing smile, and begin, once upon a time, I followed a rabbit. Her sister breathed in deeply, the dream's colors dissolving into the warmth of the present. She opened her eyes and saw the golden field before her again. The birds were singing, the grass danced gently in the wind, and Alice was visible in the distance, chasing a butterfly, arms flung wide in the pure freedom of youth. It was only a dream, perhaps, but one so vivid it could almost be real. And wasn't that the magic of dreams? That they pressed up against the edge of truth, like fingers against a curtain, just enough to leave a mark? She stood at last, brushing leaves from her skirt. Somewhere, a rabbit hole yawned beneath a hedge. Somewhere, a caterpillar waited on a mushroom. Somewhere, a queen played croquet with flamingos and hedgehogs, and a girl named Alice was forever walking the fine line between dreams and daylight. As she strolled down the sunlit path, her thoughts still brimming with wonder, she carried Alice's dream with her, not as fantasy, but as possibility. A story begun, not finished. And perhaps, just perhaps, a dream that would return again one day. And so Alice wandered on, the sunlight catching in her hair, her feet brushing through the soft grass that seemed to whisper under every step. The field stretched before her like a golden sea, dotted with nodding wildflowers, bees hovering lazily in the warm air. She moved slowly now, not because she was tired, but because the world around her felt more vivid, as if still touched by dream. She thought of the White Rabbit with his ticking watch, the Mad Hatter's riddles, and the Cheshire Cat's grin suspended in the sky like a second moon. Had it all been real? Or only imagination running wild? She didn't know. But it no longer mattered. In her heart, the characters were alive, laughing, plotting, dancing, disappearing. They might not be visible in the waking world, but they had made their mark, deep and certain, like footprints in a garden path after rain. She paused under an old tree, one hand resting against the bark. Its shade was cool, and the hum of nature surrounded her. In that moment, it seemed perfectly possible that a hole beneath its roots might open onto a wonderland of its own. She smiled, remembering. The Queen's booming commands. The trial with its nonsense rules. The moment when the cards had flown at her, then vanished. All dreams, yes. But dreams that had changed her, just a little. She saw now that the world was full of its own peculiarities, its own Mad Hatters, sleepy dormice, and secret doors. And perhaps the greatest adventure was in being curious enough to find them. She took a deep breath and turned for home, the path winding before her like a question waiting to be answered. Behind her, the breeze rustled the leaves gently, like pages of a story still being written. And somewhere, just beyond the line where reality meets wonder, a rabbit was watching. Still running. Still late. Still inviting.